9,
8,
7,
6,
5,
4, 3,
2.
1. Hello and welcome to a very special show here at Slooh. I presented alongside our partners at the All Farmers Almanac. We have got a great show lined up for you. All the moon fans out there are going to love this one because tonight we're celebrating the arrival of not just the full moon, but the seasonal blue moon. Now, let's take a look at our live feed tonight because we've got some new ones here for you. We have all the telescopes that Slooh members control every night pointed towards the moon tonight. We also have a couple of video feeds as well. We'll show those in a second. But this is the all-sky camera view. So this is the camera that Slooh members use to check on sky conditions. And you can see there on the left, those are the Slooh domes. This camera kind of gives you the full sky, so it's kind of distorted, but there you can see above the horizon, the bright dot. That's not the sun, that is indeed our moon. Now you can't actually see some of the other objects that we're going to be talking about tonight, but we can in some of the other feeds. So let's take a flick through what we've got tonight. Now then, this is our new constellation cam, and what you can see here, we've adjusted the exposure here so that the moon kind of looks a bit burnt out, but it does mean that we can see these other bright objects, and the bright object just below the little Twitter birdie is Mars. We're going to be talking about that later. So we've got the constellation cam. Don't forget, Slooh members, you can use the StarShare camera on the live channel. So make sure you watch the show over at slooh.com on the live channel, and you can snap all of the images from that camera this evening. So what else have we got? We have got, I believe, our new Meteor cam. Now this is a very, very similar field of view, but this is a live video feed. This is a very special camera that takes low light video, and there you can see 4 objects that we're going to be talking about with Slooh astronomer Bob Berman later on tonight. He's going to tell us exactly which is which. And there we have the wide field telescope view. So this is a great one for the moon because it always shows you, no matter how big, no matter how small it is, it always shows you the full disk of the moon. And then we've got our special half-meter telescope view as well. This is going to zoom in a little bit more so that we can see even more detail on the moon. That'll be coming up shortly. There it is. And you can see there, it's just chopped off a little bit, just on the left-hand side, just as the image changes to the next one. But then we've got an extra special close-up view. Look at this. This is our new solar system telescope, and this is a highly zoomed in view of the moon because this solar system telescope is really set up best for the planets. And if you can imagine, actually, the size of that crater there, that's the same size that Saturn looks in this camera. So you can see that it's perfect, absolutely perfect for viewing these kind of objects. Wow, what a fabulous view that is. That's the first time, members, that's the first time the world has seen a live video coming in from the new Slooh solar system telescope. How cool is that? So don't forget, you can Slooh members can snap images from those live feeds throughout the show in the StarShare camera. Now, there is so much we don't yet understand about our nearest celestial neighbor, so much that I'd like to share with you. And to do this, we're going to be starting a new series of lunar shows that are going to delve into every aspect of the moon, including some topics that not everyone would really like us to talk about. So watch this space on that one. But anyway, back to tonight's show to help us explain why tonight's moon is known as the full flower blue moon. That's a bit of a mouthful. The full flower blue moon. We have some great guests lined up for you, including Slooh astronomer and astronomy editor of the Old Farmers Almanac, Bob Berman, and he's going to tell us all about the moon's orbit and a little bit later the best way to observe the moon and this beautiful, beautiful group of objects from your own backyard or garden later on tonight. And we'll also be joined by Janice Stillman. She's the editor of the Old Farmers Almanac, and she's going to offer some insight into why this particular full moon is known as the flower moon. Janice is also going to tell us a few fascinating tales of some rather strange ways humans have used the moon and its position in their lives. Now, if you have any questions for me or my esteemed guests, just send them to @Slooh on Twitter or use the Slooh chat box if you're watching this show on our live channel at slooh.com. Now, let's kick off the show while we look at this amazing video view. That is absolutely cracking, isn't it? Absolutely cracking. Let's take get a better understanding of our closest celestial neighbour, the moon. And for that, there is none better than Slooh astronomer and astronomy editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, Bob Berman. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Oh, great to be here, Paul. Thanks.
What do you make of this live video feed, first of all, Bob, from the new solar system telescope?
It's so exciting. You know, I've been with Slooh for what, 11 years, and this is the opening seconds of this new system. And thanks to you, Paul, for I know you're there on the Canary Islands periodically setting these things up and making them happen. And with all the great, huge Slooh telescopes, what a nice addition this is. Live video, real time, close up views, and I can't wait till we get into the planets with this one. But just looking at the moon's limb here, the moon's edge, at the lower left, you can actually see a mountain over the horizon. The moon being only 2,160 miles across, its horizon, its ground slopes and curves a lot faster than ours does. And look at that mountain in the sunlight, catching the rays of the sun.
It's great.
It's actually over the edge. It's sitting on the dark side of the moon, but the mountain is the peak is standing up within view. It's great.
And Bob, it's exactly that. Actually, we digress a little bit because you pointed that out. These are exactly the features that generate what are called Bailey's beads during a total solar eclipse, aren't they?
Yes, exactly. Look at how the limb shows an unevenness. You know, you won't see that on Earth. You get a close up of the Earth's limb, and it looks straight across, because we tend not to have these kind of peaks and valleys. And also, we're a larger planet. We're 4 times the width. But you can see on the edge of the moon, when the sun is just skimming through it, exactly. We'll see that next year on August 21st, of course, when we cover the first total solar eclipse of the sun in 38 years in the United States.
That's going to be a grand one. Now, Bob, before we talk in more detail about the moon, you're wearing 2 hats tonight, as my introduction said, both as Slooh astronomer and as the astronomy editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, who we partner up for these moon shows. What's your involvement? What does being astronomy editor for the Old Farmer's Almanac involve?
Well, for the last quarter century, I've been very proud to be associated with that most venerable. That is the longest running publication, you know, in the United States. It was around when Benjamin Franklin was around. And so every year I'm responsible for preparing the astronomy, what's happening night by night, and to each of the planets, and reporting on meteor showers and planet visibility. And one big section, and it's a reason that people buy the Farmer's Almanac. They buy it for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is to get accurate night by night, month by month, actual night sky astronomy information. And I understand many astronomy clubs and organizations use the Old Farmer's Almanac as their source for information, and we make sure it's accurate too. So I'm very proud of that. That must
take a huge amount of work on your part. How far before publication do you have to do your work on it?
Well, let's put it this way. I'm working now on the 2018 edition.
Wow. Okay, I thought it was kind of going to be about 6 or 8 months, but okay, that's blown that one out of the way. Anyway, let's get back. Here we are with this lovely view of our full moon through the half-meter telescope here at the flagship observatory in the Canary Islands. It's the full flower blue moon, or should that be full blue flower moon? Why are we calling this one, Bob, a blue moon?
Well, there's 2 definitions. If you went back a century, nobody called anything remotely moon-like a blue moon. The expression blue moon meant rare. You might say to your teenage daughter, I know you have a daughter too, you don't clean up your room. The last time you clean your room is once in a blue moon. So we use that for something extremely rare. But a Maine almanac, not ours, not the Old Farmer's Almanac, but a local almanac, said in the 1920s into the 1930s that a blue moon, they defined the blue moon as the third full moon in a season that has four. Now, normally there's only three full moons in a season, but once in a while there'll be four. There is this year. And so the third of those four, they call the blue moon. I have no idea where they got it from. It certainly has no pedigree. The ancient Greeks, none of the Native American tribes, nobody called it that. Nobody had that definition, but there it was in Maine. And then astronomy, not astronomy magazine, no, 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 I take that back. Sky and Telescope magazine in the 1940s did an article mentioning that, and they got it wrong. They wrote in their
Right.
article that a blue moon was believed by some to be the second of two full moons in the same month.
In the
Once
same month.
every two and
Okay.
a half years, if there's a full moon on the first or the second of the month, there will be another full moon on the very end of that month. And that
Yeah.
second full moon in the same month, that's a full moon, they said. And to this day, that's become the more common definition of it. So when most people talk about a blue moon, it's nowadays, and again, it's of new origin and it's of mistaken origin. But nowadays,
Hmm.
that's what we call a blue moon. Most people would say it's the second of two full moons in a month, but there's still that old one from that Maine almanac that you could use instead, and that's why we're calling it that tonight.
Okay. I mean, I have to admit that it wasn't until a couple of weeks ago when we put this on our calendar, our event calendar, that I actually realized that there was the seasonal um, blue moon. But actually, even then, until you told me that just now, I had actually assumed that that was kind of the add-on. I assumed that it was the two blue moons in one month was the kind of primary blue moon that you get. But we're talking about a blue moon. We're looking at it here. This is a live color video camera that's attached to the solar system telescope. It looks pretty grey to me. And we also, Bob, we hear about a blood moon and we hear about this blue moon, but there isn't actually any difference in the color of these moons. Is there? I mean, there's no
No,
effect.
no, no. This is showing the true color. People might think that we have some kind of black and white video camera that we didn't have the budget for a color camera. But you can see clearly what the astronauts reported, and that is the moon is the grayest object in the solar system. It has no color. This is a true color image, and that's because the surface is covered with, well, here's a hint. See if our listeners can guess. It's a powder. What would be an inexpensive, it's got to be cheap because otherwise we would have gone back there, wouldn't we have? It's got to be an inexpensive common substance that's a powder. Want to guess what it's covered with? What substance?
Well, our
Okay.
producer has just chatted to me that she thinks it's cheese.
It's not
Parmesan,
granulated
presumably.
cheese. It's sand. It's silicon dioxide. It's covered with
Okay.
white sand, very fine, fine powder. So that's really what it's made of. Now, so what can add a color to it? Well, it's never blue unless there's a chemical release into the atmosphere, and it would have to be a very unpleasant. Let's hope we never see a blue moon personally, an actual moon turning blue, because that would be a chemical release. But a red moon, a blood moon, that's different. Two things cause that. One is a lunar eclipse when the moon goes
Yep.
into Earth's shadow. And since Earth casts a red shadow, not a black shadow, the way you and I do when we walk down the street, Earth's shadow is red. So the moon goes into that. It turns a coppery, like a penny colored red shadow. Or every single time the sun or the moon are low down in the sky and have to shine through a lot more air, then it'll turn, as we all know from experience all our lives, it'll turn yellow or orange or even a deep red if there's more moisture in the air, if there's more pollution in the air, like around many cities,
Yeah.
then you'll get this deep red moon.
We had a marvelous, marvelous moon up here tonight. We've actually got some Saharan dust in the atmosphere at the moment, and I watched the moon rise, and it came up over the neighbouring island of Gran Canaria. And Bob, it was, I mean, this is when it was quite high up. This is actually from one of the security cameras in the dome, and you can see it even picks up Mars, in fact. Mars is a little white dot off to the right-hand side, but when the moon was just rising, it was such a deep orange color. And it, you've said to us in previous moon shows, Bob, that the moon is one of the roundest objects, but I tell you, it didn't look too round when it was rising up tonight. What causes that effect? You know, you see this kind of squashed moon when it rises.
Well, the same thing. When we're looking at the horizon, we're looking through 13 times more atmosphere. So all of that thick air and just a little bit above it, it's less thick. So refraction, the bending of light, makes the moon's shape change just along the horizontal axis compared to the vertical axis. So it goes out of round, and its top to bottom distance is less than the side to side distance. Again, a
Okay,
phenomena we've all seen. But look at it now. Now that it's high up in the sky,
absolutely.
there is no object that we see in life other than the sun, which is generally not safe to look at directly. There's nothing that we see that's as round as a
Amazing.
perfectly full moon. And fortunately, tonight's full moon is not far away from the minute of full moon, so it looks really, really nice and round. It's only out of round by one part in 200, 4 miles out of its 2,160 mile width is out of round, and no human eye can detect
Wow.
that. So it's perfect, and it goes right
And
along with
actually,
the ancient Greeks
yeah,
who believed that the circle is the divine perfect shape.
and it takes that lovely, lovely close-up video view that we've got of it that suddenly makes this beautiful, perfect-looking sphere look a little bit ragged around the edges, literally. So, anyway, Bob, thank
Yes.
you very much. Now we're going to see you a little bit later when you're going to tell people how they can observe the moon tonight from their own backyards and gardens. And we'll also talk about these other objects that we can see in the constellation cam and the other live views that we've got tonight. Because if 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 viewers have a clear night tonight, they're in for a lovely, lovely surprise when that group of four lovely objects rises up. So we'll see you a little bit later, Bob.
Okay, good.
Now, coming up, we'll be welcoming Janice Stillman from the Old Farmer's Almanac to Slooh. She's going to discuss why some cultures refer to this particular full moon as the flower moon. And she's also got this story about the position of the moon and how that was once used in a murder trial, would you believe? And there you go. Look, there's another conspiracy theorist shot. You know, obviously the moon is man-made. Why else would it have a straight edge on it like that? Anyway, she's going to tell us all about that and reveal that the Old Farmer's Almanac once had an incredibly famous reader. Now, to the thousands of people out there, we know that actually you've got thousands of people out there watching the full moon with us tonight. If you're enjoying what you're seeing, I want to encourage you to become a Slooh member, a member of the Slooh community. It's free to try and there's no obligation. At its core, members control our telescopes, the robotic telescopes in the Canary Islands. That's what you're looking at here, and those in Chile. And there's a really simple interface, but it's powerful as well. You don't have to know very much to be able to use the Slooh telescopes, and you'll see absolutely anything you want to in space. In fact, Slooh members have taken well over 4 million photos of over 50,000 different objects in the sky. And we always say, Slooh works like a jukebox. One member is in control of the telescope, while all the other members get to see what the telescope is viewing live, just like we're bringing the public tonight. And then everybody contributes to the ongoing conversation about those images and whatever it may be. And we always say as well that it's like cavemen and women gathered around the campfire as we wander together about the universe and share our great diversity of perspectives. It really is space for everyone here. So please do give it a try. And in the process, you'll be supporting our ability to make programs like this available to the public. Now, we are going to cut for a quick commercial break, but when we return, we'll welcome Janice Stillman, editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, back to Slooh to tell us why this particular full moon is known as the flower moon, amongst other names. We'll be right back. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome the editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, Janice Stillman, to our show tonight. Janice, thank you so much for joining us and welcome back to Slooh.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be back with you.
Now, one of the reasons we love this partnership with the Old Farmer's Almanac is your ability to add this very different perspective and context to the events that we present, one that stems from history and folklore. So each of the full moons throughout the year, they have their own unique names. And this one, the full moon for May, is, I think, among other things, named the full flower moon. So how did it get that name?
Well, the names are never as mysterious as one might think. The full flower moon is an indication of flowers beginning to bloom. That spring flowers forth, if you will. And here in New England, for example, it's a period of tulips, daffodils, and swills, and even buds on trees and shrubs are starting to show up. And you're right, there were other names as well. For example, the Algonquin tribes in some places called it the corn planting moon because the temperatures were warm enough to start the corn. And also an indication that the last frost had passed, that there wasn't likely to be a killing frost again this season. And yet in other places, they may have called it the milk moon or the mother's moon because it was a period of fertility. Cows and goats and sheep were out in the pastures eating the herbs and the weeds and the grasses and producing wonderful milk.
Of course, and actually it's quite fitting. I'm here at the Canary Islands Observatory, and all of the strange wildlife up here is flowering. There are these crazy long kind of plants that are tall cones, and they're all springing into flower at the moment. And the bees are also swarming up here as well. So a very fitting name. Now, why does the Old Farmer's Almanac make a point of collecting and recording these historical interpretations that our ancestors made to their environment, like the folklore of the moon?
Yes. The Old Farmer's Almanac is a calendar of the heavens, first and foremost, and we predict the astronomical events for the entire year, the day, the week, the month, the season, and certainly moons play a big part in that. Indeed, the Old Farmer's Almanac celebrates the country life and the outdoor life, and again, moon phases and moon events play into that with the best fishing days, for example, are determined by the moon phases, and planting by the moon, certainly by the moon phases. And so it's really just a celebration of those many events. And so the names of the moon phases, of course, are always a fascination to folks.
Well, I love the fact that, you know, different tribes across North America had their different names for them. And it's all about storytelling and about putting the world around them, I guess, in their context in one way or another.
Yeah, we're thinking back hundreds of years now, right? So it was very much an oral tradition, and there was no calendar per se. There was certainly no television and internet, you know, by which to actually count the days and make appointments. So folks looked for the natural world to be an indication of what time of year it was and what practices that they would pick up and continue at that period.
Yeah, all of those visual cues that they get from nature. Now, the Old Farmer's Almanac points out that in a couple of days' time, the moon will, what you're calling, run low. Now, I haven't heard that before. What does that mean?
Well, now, I'm not an astronomer, but as I understand, the moon is at the lowest point on the celestial equator. It's right on the horizon visually to us, and indeed, if you're far enough north, it may not be visible at all. But it's called the moon runs low, and it's Tuesday, the 24th of May in this case. And indeed, a couple of weeks ago, the moon ran high. It was at its highest point in the sky. from an observable position. So coming up on Tuesday, we have moon runs low, and that always appears in the calendar pages of the Old Farmer's Almanac and has actually for centuries now.
So, Janice, wasn't there an event in history that had something to do with the run low moon?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked. Famously, a murder trial once hung on the moon's place in the sky. The killing by slingshot, or slingshot as we might call it today, occurred on August 29, 1857. A witness claimed that he saw the defendant commit the act by the light of the moon. However, the defendant's lawyer pulled out the Old Farmer's Almanac and cited the calendar page for that month. And on that day, it said moon runs low. Thus, the lawyer said there could not have been enough light for anybody to see the defendant at the distance the witness claimed he did. So the man was acquitted of the crime, and it turned out the lawyer was none other than Abraham Lincoln.
Wow, what a fascinating story! And I mean, it was good enough anyway. But then you throw Abraham Lincoln into the equation too, and he was an avid reader of the Old Farmer's Almanac. How cool is that?
And my understanding is that ours was the only almanac that had moon runs low or moon runs high on the pages, the calendar pages at that time. And indeed, we have a full set of almanacs down the hall in the library, and you can pull out that year, turn to that page, and indeed it says on August 29, 1857, moon runs low on the page. So
well,
it's
I
a
hope you realize,
fascinating
Janice,
story in almanac history, yes.
I hope you realize that you've now got to top this story on the next full moon show you join us on. But anyway, Janice, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We look forward to welcoming you and the other experts in the Old Farmer's Almanac for future Slooh shows.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janice. That was Janice Stillman, editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac. Now, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, Bob Berman will be back to talk to us a bit about Mars and how, if you look carefully, you can see it in the same field of view as the moon tonight. But before that, and speaking of Mars, I wanted to remind you of a couple of big shows we have coming up here at Slooh. Now, tomorrow night, I'm really looking forward to this one. At the Red Planet, Mars will be at opposition. That's the best period of time to observe it. Now, we're teaming up with Astronomy Magazine to bring you a show all about that fourth rock from the sun. We'll discuss what makes the planet unique, the kind of importance it played in ancient cultures, and our fascination with the planet, both in art and in exploration. Then, on the 30th, May 30th, Mars will be at its brightest and closest point to Earth in over a decade. We'll have live images of the planet, and we'll be joined by Martian guests, including the folks from the Mars Society. Now, don't go anywhere. We will be right back after this short commercial break. Welcome back. You're watching the full flower blue moon live at Slooh, or maybe it's the blue flower full moon. We haven't quite made our minds up yet. I had one question in. What is this crater that we are looking at? It's the crater called Halcyon. It's not very well known. To give you some kind of sense of scale of this, it's 100 miles across. And something I'm going to ask Bob Berman about in a minute, because I've never heard of this term before. When I was looking up some information about this, it says that this particular crater is in the zone of librations, making it part of the lunar incognita. That kind of sounds like a Tom Hanks film, doesn't it? Ron Howard. Anyway, let's welcome back Slooh astronomer and astronomy editor for the Old Farmer's Almanac, everybody's favorite, Bob Berman. Hi, Bob.
Hi, great to be
Now,
back. And you're bringing up some great topics.
have you heard? You might. I know that. Why am I even asking you? Can you please tell us about this term, lunar incognita? I've never heard of that before. What's that about?
Yes, yes, because there is, even though the moon's rotation, precisely 27.32166 days, exactly matches its period of rotation around Earth, and therefore you would think it would keep one side toward us, which it more or less does. But because it has a little bit of a inclination 5 degrees to the plane of the flat plane of the solar system, and because it does run low and run high. Hey, you know what the editor of the Farmer's Almanac said, the old Farmer's Almanac, Janice Stillman, accurately talked about running low, running high. Exactly right. The moon, once in its cycle around us, is in the lowest part of its orbit. That's in the constellation of Sagittarius, and then it never gets up very high. For most of America, it never rises more than 18 degrees. From places 7 degrees north of Fairbanks, Alaska, doesn't
Right.
rise at all on that day,
Wow.
coming up in a few days. And 2 weeks before that, or 2 weeks later, it runs high, meaning it's in on the Taurus Gemini border, where it gets almost overhead. Not quite, except for from people from Hawaii see it overhead. The rest of America sees it very, very high up. So it really does do that. While it's doing that, we on Earth get to peek down at it from above a little bit, or peek up at it from below when
Ah,
you think about it.
okay.
And therefore, we're seeing over the edge of the moon a little bit, or under the bottom edge of the moon. And so that lets us see parts of the moon that we ordinarily wouldn't see. And then there's one
Aha.
other factor, and that is Kepler's second law, which tells us that as an object gets closer to Earth, that is, gets to perigee, as the moon does in its elliptical orbit, it whisks around us, zooms around us at a faster speed, and then slows down when it's at its farthest point. We cover that here. We do the large moons, the super moons, and a
The
few
mini moons.
a mini moon, the farthest away
Yeah.
moon. But a little less known is that it changes its speed. But since it
Yeah.
does not change its rotation speed, but does change its orbital speed, that means sometimes we can look around to the right or the left side of the moon.
Aha.
Beyond what's seeing the same face. And so the combination of us being able to look down or up because of its declination, or to look on the left or the right side because it's it speeds up and slows down, is called libration, and not libation. It has nothing to do with an alcohol problem, although it
Shame.
can drive you to that. Do you know, Paul, that Isaac Newton once said that just thinking about the moon gave him a headache?
No.
Because he was trying to figure out all of these different motions. But one
I
of them is,
see.
yes, libration, that lets us peek around a little bit. So that crater you just showed us lies in the zone that disappears sometimes because of libration, the forbidden incognito zone of features
Wow.
that sometimes vanish and sometimes appear a little bit more in from the moon's edge than we ever see it before. And these are the kind of things the old Farmer's Almanac that we love to talk about there too.
I mean, I've learned a few new things tonight. There's nothing new for you to learn about astronomy, Bob, but these two things, running low and this lunar incognito, are two things that I hadn't actually heard about since tonight, and I didn't actually kind of put two and two together. That that was what's called causing libration. So, and I think in total, don't we land up, because of these effects, we can actually see, what is it, 55% of the
No,
lunar
closer to
surface? So,
60% of the moon, closer to
yeah.
60% of the moon. And so the part
Wow.
that's permanently hidden from us, we always assumed it looks like the part that we see. Look at that with those blotches, the
Mm.
maria, the solidified lava areas that they used to think were oceans or seas. We assume the part we can't see look the same. Although before anybody knew for sure, in October of 1959, when the first Russian spacecraft went to the far side and sent back the first pictures. For all we knew for sure, maybe the moon was just a half shell with scaffolding in the back, just supporting like a Western prop in Hollywood. Of course, that was considered unlikely. But when we actually went to the far side, you know what happened? We got the shock of our lives. We found out that the far side of the moon looks nothing like the side that we see. It's an area that doesn't have those dark blotches on it.
Yeah.
And so as usual, we were wrong. You know, we keep getting surprises when it comes to astronomy, don't we?
Absolutely. And I mean, look, you only have to look at Pluto, don't you? For that, the last couple of months, the close-ups that we've had of Pluto were just so unexpected to such an extraordinary degree. The fact that there's some kind of surface tectonic activity of one kind or another, and that is why so many of us love astronomy as a subject, because you get to a certain age, I think, and you just want to devour information and facts and knowledge. And astronomy just keeps feeding you that in bucket loads as a never ender. Now, Bob, I'm going to come to you about an oddity that I think you've got to share, but I want to take a look. I promised viewers that we'd take them through the constellation cam and the meteor cam tonight, because there's this really fabulous spectacle that viewers can see from their own backyards tonight. So if we can switch over to the constellation cam view, maybe you can point out, actually, let's go to the meteor cam view just to keep the studio on their toes. They were filming an alien convention in New York. Oh, now that's moved since we saw it last. So that's going to be quite difficult, Bob, for you to actually point out
Well,
there. And I
still,
won't be
we could still do that because we could see that the moon is just off the top edge, and we've
yeah,
got these other two objects nearby. And people who have a clear sky tonight, the northeastern United States is buried under pretty much overcast, but those parts of the world that have clear skies, go on out, look lowish in the southeast, and you'll see what looks like a baseball diamond with the moon at the top of the diamond and several stars forming the other parts of it. And here's what you're seeing. The lowest star, which looks orange, is the famous star in Scorpius, the major star of Scorpius, Antares, supergiant star. The one on first base, that is on the right side of the diamond, that's the planet Mars, and that's the brightest of all the objects, except for the moon, of course. The moon is at the top, would be on second base, and on the left side is the planet Saturn. So if you have a backyard telescope pointed at, if you're going to point it anywhere, I'd say skip the moon, skip Mars, go right to Saturn, and you'll be glad
yeah.
you did.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Bob. I did steal a couple of views this evening through the telescopes, and the moon, as we said in our last show, full moon, not very many features visible because you haven't got the contrast there. Went to Mars, the telescope hadn't really cooled down very much. It's still quite small, even though it's so close to opposition. Maybe pick out a little bit of darkening here and there, a few features. Whizzed over to Saturn, bang. One of those, it just knocks your socks off every single time to see those beautiful open rings as they are in 2016. So a glorious sight. But even if you haven't got a telescope, I have to say, when I watched this grouping rise here tonight over the horizon, just as a naked eye spectacle, it was glorious. And I said to you before the show, Bob, to see an object so close to the moon, a full moon, but still be visible like Mars is tonight. It made it feel like something was wrong, something was out of kilter somehow with the solar system, to be able to see such a bright object so close, to that moon. So if you have clear skies tonight, viewers, you've got to go out there and grab a little view of that grouping together. Now, Bob, you said to me before the show that you have a fascinating pearl or oddity that you would like to share with us. So there you go. Can you remember what that was?
Yes, because we're talking about the moon. Just what's an oddity that we don't know about when we look at the full moon?
Yeah.
And here's one that came to me that we found out from the Apollo mission. When the unused section of the Apollo mission, that is the lunar ascent engine, was sent back crashing onto the lunar surface, we learned something that really shocked us because the moon started vibrating. and it started shaking like a gong. And it kept ringing. A minute later, it was still shaking. 5 minutes later, half an hour later, 1 hour later. This is very different from Earth, where earthquakes dampen out within a minute or two.
Yeah,
On the
yeah.
moon, when it's struck by an object, even something as small as one of our unneeded craft, we send it crashing back onto the moon's surface. The moon rings like a bell for 2.5 hours, like a
Wow.
giant gong, which tells us that its interior cannot be molten the way we have a core. One of the two cores of Earth is a liquid core. It must be a solid core that acts like a crystal, so that vibrations keep going back and forth through the entire body of the moon and cause the
Right.
moon to continue shaking for hours. That's very
I
strange. We
had
don't see that anywhere else.
I had no idea that that was how far back, that knowledge went. What was the? It was L Cross, wasn't it? That we covered here at Slooh when they sent the L
Yes.
Cross
Well, wasn't
spacecraft.
that exciting? We when the
Yeah.
craft smashed into the moon at an angle, at an oblique angle, so that it kind of
Mm.
came in lower and lower until it crashed into some mountains, and we covered that here at Slough,
Yeah.
looking for debris to be thrown up from the edge of the moon. Wow, we've had some great memories, haven't we?
So I suspect actually, I didn't hear it talked about at the time, but I guess there were some sensors that were measuring, that L Cross spacecraft to because I know this is it's seismology, isn't it? They use it with the sun as well. They use it with the big solar telescopes here. This is how they can infer the interior structure of something by listening to these resonances that you were talking about. Now, Bob, we looked very briefly there at Mars, so close to the moon, looking beautiful and red. And of course, the star Antares, marking the heart of Scorpius, also looks very red as well. So that the contrast there is lovely. But tomorrow is a very special day, isn't it, for the red planet? It's the opposition of Mars. Now, what is a planetary opposition?
Yes, that the opposition is coming up at early in the morning. So it's actually, you could even say it was at the end of tonight. But yes, tomorrow night is the day in which it's happening. Opposition is when there's a straight line formed with the Earth in the middle. So we've got the sun on one side of us and Mars on the opposite side of the sky as the sun. So we're forming a very straight line in space. In fact, if we could cast a shadow, Mars would almost be in it. It's just going to, that's how good the alignment is in all three
Ah, oh,
dimensions. And when that
yes.
happens, normally that's the same night as Mars's closest approach. But because the Martian orbit is so eccentric and also has a tilt of a couple of degrees to it, the actual close approach, as we mentioned earlier, is going to come up in about a week.
Yeah, a week's time. And so that we'll talk maybe a little bit more about that. Now, I'm just going to put the studio in a tiswas a minute because you've just said something about there about the Earth shadow, and I did produce a graphic that by chance actually showed this. So while we're talking about the next little bit about Mars, Bob, maybe the studio can pull that up. But I don't know if you've been looking at the astro-related news recently, just this last week, but there's been talk that NASA are hiding the fact that there are trees growing on Mars. Now, aside from asking ourselves, why would anyone want to hide such an amazing discovery? What do you make of it? And are there reasons trees as we know them couldn't grow on that dusty red orb?
Well, if of course it couldn't. First of all, there may be water under the surface, but there's sure no rain falling from the sky. There's no atmosphere, and trees, as all of us know, require a little bit of air. It's a near vacuum on the surface. Plus, there's a high degree of radiation. No, it would not be habitable. But this issue of NASA hiding things, there are people who think the government lies about absolutely everything, but
Mm,
they should realize that even if the government were so inclined, astronomers would not, because we tend to be blabbermouths. If we
we
find
do.
something new, especially if it's exciting and unusual, we're going to
Yep,
tell our friends or family, our girlfriends or boyfriends, we're going to blab it to the press,
we
and
will.
no secrets can be kept when it comes to astronomy. So
Yeah.
rest assured, if the weirder it is and the closer it would be to alien life forms being discovered, the more likely it is for it to get out immediately. and no secrets will ever be kept. And even if they would, we'll tell you here at Slooh because we have no incentive to do anything but tell you the truth. No, there's
Uh,
no trees on Mars. Too bad. There's no trees. It would be nice. We could probably use the shade once we send people there.
I think that particular story started when I think it was released about oxygen being discovered on Mars, but it was actually a different type of oxygen to the kind of oxygen that